talk about the Chevron Doctrine, this is like, in many ways, the Chevron Doctrine, I think, is going to, is on one half of it, it's like a Schoolhouse Rock type of situation. But the Chevron Doctrine, in terms of the fabric of our society, this is the thing that's really going to rip it apart, it seems to me, because this makes it virtually impossible for Congress to empower agencies to protect consumers, citizens, investors. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? I mean, just again, remind us what the Chevron Doctrine does, but like, where are we going to see this first, and how is this going to be implemented? Because it seems like you could have every corporation that has been inhibited by 80% of like regulations, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know if anybody's quantified this, because Congress, when they say to the EPA, make the waters safe, the EPA in Congress don't have a list of every potentially dangerous chemical that could be in the water. The EPA's got to go out. They got to do testing. They don't even know what to test for sometimes. So it could take years to find out that there's triglyceridenzyme or whatever it is in the water, and that causes cancer. There's going to be no ability for our government to function in that way.
Yeah.
Has anybody quantified like how many of this could be? And they're just all going to go to Texas, right? And just case after case after case. Supreme Court's going to take one a year, maybe, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem here is, you've got the problem of the Fifth Circuit, which is the super right-wing court that oversees Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, that will, virtually any regulation you bring to them, they're just going to strike it down. And so you're going to have the Fifth Circuit issuing all of these injunctions. You have other judges throughout the country who are better judges than the ones on the Fifth Circuit. And so they will uphold at least some regulations. But what happens when you have a disagreement among federal appeals courts is that the Supreme Court's supposed to resolve it. I think the Supreme Court's really going to regret what they did by overruling Chevron and making the Supreme Court the final word on every regulatory decision that is made in the United States of America, because they don't have the personnel to handle all the questions that are going to come this way. Think about the case where you have a problem where there's some pollutant that may be entering our drinking water that may or may not be unsafe, and the EPA wants to determine whether to ban this thing. Well, how do they do that? First of all, they have a staff of scientists themselves who study it. They go to other research institutions and talk to them and see what they are learning about this. They may fund some research. They may, they're going to talk to the regulated industries and try to get a sense of, if we do ban this, how much of a burden is this? What is the cost of this regulation that we're going to weigh against the potential benefits of the ban? So that is a job that requires, a whole slew of very specialized employees who have the freedom to talk to whoever they need to talk to in order to come to the right answer. When you aggregate that across all of the problems that the federal government has to deal with, you're talking about tens of thousands of employees throughout the federal government who are all engaged in this information gathering, this deliberative process, this process of making sure that every stakeholder is brought into the conversation, so that when a decision finally is made, you have all the information you need to be able to make the right decision. Now the final word is going to rest with the Supreme Court, which has 9 justices and 36 law clerks. And because they're a court, a court isn't allowed to call up third parties and get their opinion on something. It's called an ex parte communication. They're not supposed to do that. And so they don't have the personnel to conduct the inquiry that they're going to need to conduct. They aren't even institutionally allowed to have the conversations they need to have in order to make intelligent decisions. I mean, I think the justices are going to find themselves just with a fire hose of questions that not only do they not know the answer to, but they're going to discover they don't want to be the final word on.
Okay. Well, aside from Harlan Crow maybe bringing other people along on the trip to educate a couple of the justices, on the fishing trip as to some of these questions, what about this scenario? Because it strikes me that the way the court resolves that dilemma goes something like this. There's just like take forever chemicals. EPA says, you can't have this amount of forever chemicals in your water supply, whatever it is. Somebody who's putting out forever chemicals, they go to Texas, they find a court says, no, EPA does not have the authority in this instance. But then the EPA or somebody else brings a case against that same company in the Ninth Circuit in the EPA, and they find the EPA does have the authority to say these things are illegal. Doesn't the case that comes to the Supreme Court ultimately is one of standing and one of like which, or can that, for instance, that corporation, let's say, we're going to buy a PO box in Texas and we're going to establish our headquarters there for the purposes of regulatory, whatever it is, for regulatory compliance. Isn't it ultimately going to come down to a case where the Supreme Court says, yeah, this is the way that you can escape that standing can exist in one circuit, and right. That decision holds for you as a company, and you're just going to get some type of everybody's going to go to Texas in the same way that some corporations will go to Delaware to avoid whatever tax it is or registering hassles. There's going to end up being something like that so that the court can avoid all these questions and basically delegate it to some of the right-wing circuits.
Right. So it is trivially easy for any right-wing litigant to get a case in Texas District Court, and specifically in Amarillo, Texas Federal District Court, where they'll get Judge Matthew Kaczmarek who'll do whatever the hell they want. It is trivially easy for any Republican to get any injunction that they want right now. There is still, however, an appeals process. So, as a practical matter, the way this is likely to work is that anyone who doesn't like a regulation will go to Matty Kaczmarek or one of the other judges in Texas who will rubber stamp whatever injunction they want. That will go up to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit is really bad, but the Fifth Circuit right now is an 8-7 court. It has 8 MAGA judges who are just as nutty as Matty Kaczmarek, and it has 7 judges who range from Democrats to Bush Republicans who sometimes say sensible things. And so a lot on the Fifth Circuit depends. You're mathematically more likely to get a crazy panel, but it is possible to get a sane panel in the Fifth Circuit. So maybe you get a sane panel and some of Matty Kaczmarek's work gets thrown out that way. And then eventually these cases are going to have to make their way up to the Supreme Court. And the question at that point is going to depend, because these guys haven't shown any capacity to read a statute or to come up with any coherent theory of what things are and are not allowed by the law. It's going to come down to what Brett and Amy want. But I guess where, and this isn't really an optimistic view, but I'm trying to be precise in what I think is going to happen here. I don't think Brett and Amy want someone to be able to dump potassium cyanide into our water supply. I think there is some point where Brett and Amy are going to say, nah, that's too far. I might drink that. It might kill me. I don't want that. But they're not going to put the bar where I would put it. They're not going to put the bar where any sensible person would put it. And they're not going to put the bar where, experts who actually know what they're talking about would put it. We're just going to have this arbitrary system where issue after, it takes forever to get a regulation in place because you can get a temporary injunction blocking it for months or years from Matty Kaczmarek whenever you want. And then eventually the case makes it up to Brett and Amy. And the question is, do Brett and Amy want this regulation to exist?
And that also presumes, of course, that by that point, there won't be some third member of the court replacing, let's say, I don't know, Sonia Sotomayor, who is to the right of both of those guys.
Yeah.
It's not like things are trending in a great way.
Yeah, and that's the other big risk, is that you could see the Fifth Circuitification of the United States, because if Trump gets into power, if Sotomayor, who's pushing 70, Roberts, who's about the same age, or even Elena Kagan, who right now is 64, if one of them should have to leave the court during Trump's tenure, then he would probably appoint one of these jokers from the Fifth Circuit or a similar judge to replace them. And at some point, you have 5 elitos. At some point, you have a Supreme Court where you have 5 people who are just going to do whatever the Republican Party says.
We have. It feels like we have barely touched upon some of these cases, but I know you've got work to do. And I imagine, but maybe we'll have to reconnect over the course of the summer to talk about things like NetChoice and a couple of the others. It really does. I mean, the Chevron thing, again, we have been, I feel like it's been 6-7 years that we have been talking at least about how that was being cited up, and it is finally done, and it's going to have massive implications, along with the sort of like a couple of the other cases over the past couple of weeks that sort of like nip around the edges of undermining the administrative state. So I think please.
Can I say one thing real quick about NetChoice?
Feel free. Say as much as you want. I want to try and be respectful of your time, because I want to do this again, but. Yes.
Yeah. So NetChoice was a case that was a very normal case where 6 justices agreed that the government is not allowed to tell media companies what they're required to print. That is the most normal First Amendment holding that you could imagine. Like, I mean, I would think it obvious.
This is a case, and just to be clear, this is a case that came out of Texas and Florida, right, where those 2 state governments wanted to basically say that you need to print more conservative material.
Yeah, they tried to force social media companies to, not ban or moderate or do anything to conservative content. So like Donald Trump couldn't be banned. And the Supreme Court said very sensibly, we have a First Amendment. You cannot order a media company to print something they don't want to print any more than like the federal government could tell the newspapers, like, you're going to run this article and not that article. So like, very normal opinion. Like, anyone who believes in the First Amendment will understand why that decision is correct. But this is why I tend to ascribe the Trump immunity case more to incompetence than to malice. Because like, if these guys really were just trying to greenlight a dictatorship, I mean, what has happened in Viktor Orban's Hungary? What has happened in Narendra Modi's India? Like, the first thing that the dictator tries to capture is control of the press. And so, like, if these guys were competently moving us to a dictatorship, they wouldn't just have ruled that Trump is immune from prosecution. They would have also ruled, and the Republican Party is allowed to seize control of the press. The fact that they didn't do it just tells me they have no idea what they're doing, no concept of the implications of their decision, and they are, we are slouching towards Caligula. We are bumbling towards Commodus. And not necessarily, there isn't necessarily anyone at the tiller here.
And I just want to say, for those of you who are excited about living in a fascist authoritarian state, incompetence is actually probably the way that most of them happen, particularly, with various institutions. It is the fumbling and the failure of institutions rather than, I think, like that brings us to these type of places, at least historically, it seems to me, as opposed to a sort of like a massive concerted effort. And again, though, they are sort of like, it's a lot to, it's a big bite to take. Maybe we'll get down to a more like a little bending of that First Amendment as time goes on, where, there may be more opportunity for the court to sort of say like, well, you just can't ban if they're talking about, drinking liberal tears or something to that effect. Or
Yeah, and NetChoice was a 6-3 decision. So like, if Trump gets to appoint 2 justices, I guess he gets to control the media as well. So like, it's not like everything is safe. But like, well, I'll just close with this thought. Incompetence is how we wind up with a fascist or authoritarian society. And I really hope that in the next few weeks, the Democratic Party shows that it is a competent institution, which, among other things, is capable of coming up with a presidential candidate who can beat Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Well, there's like a lot of stuff happening. The first sitting representative just came out, Lloyd Doggett in Texas, and said Biden has to withdraw. And Pelosi is, I'll read this quote from Pelosi. I think it's a legitimate question to say that, is this an episode or is this a condition? She just said on TV.
Yeah.
Things are moving very quickly right now.
I think it is unreasonable to expect a proud elderly man like Joe Biden to go through all of the stages of grief in a weekend. And so, like, I'm not freaking out that he hasn't made the decision to withdraw yet. Mm-hmm. But, like, he needs to go through the stages of grief pretty quickly here.
I think I am waiting for that first poll to come out.
Well, CNN did just have one in a national poll. Biden's down by 6, just came out an hour ago, and Kamala Harris does better.
Well, there's our answer.
There you go.
Yeah.
Ian, I want to say it's a pleasure.
Thank you for so artfully articulating how our society is crumbling around us. That's yes. It was beautiful.
No, I mean, we got to see America at its peak. Like, I mean, be happy for that.
There you go. Ian, hope to connect with you over the next couple of months to go through some of these other cases. But really appreciate your work as always. And can't encourage people enough to go back and read your last 2 books to get a sense of how exactly we got here and how there was at least, some people who were aware of what the trajectory was. Really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.